Okay, welcome to tonight's meeting. My name is Councillor Patrick Walsh. I'm the chair of this committee. A few housekeeping points before we begin. This meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. By participating in this meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. If the fire alarm does sound, either constantly or intermittently, I will adjourn the meeting. Please leave the meeting in an orderly fashion by the staff fire exit, which is behind me to the right. Security officers will direct you to the assembly point on Riverside Gardens. There are tea and coffee and biscuits available in the staff kitchen next to reception, and the toilets on my left-hand side. You will need your HF security badge to get into the kitchen and the other office areas. Please, can officers introduce themselves before they speak each time? And could everybody please make sure to speak into the microphone as well? So let's proceed to the meeting. So apologies for absence. None have been received, but we do have Councillor Patel, who is joining us remotely this evening. Just for the record, Councillor Patel, you will be able to participate in tonight's meeting, but you will not be able to vote on any of the items. Moving on to item 2, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest? No interest. Okay, hearing none. Moving along to item 3, minutes. Matters arising. Sukhvinder, do you wish to speak?
Yes. Thank you, Chair. Councillor Walsh, members of the committee, I just wanted to indicate that on the minutes, the matter that I wanted to raise here was that I want to let you know that the accounts for 21-22 were formally signed off by our external auditors on the 22nd of February. So that needs to be recorded. Thank you very much to Paul and his team for the excellent work that they did with the council to get that sorted.
Thank you, Sukhvinder. Do members agree to the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 27th of November 23 as being a true and accurate record? Great. Okay, thank you. And moving along then to item 4, statement of accounts for the year 22 and 23. And could I ask Sukhvinder to introduce himself? And also attending on this item is James Newman. Sukhvinder.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mine will be a brief introduction. So for members of the committee, we've attached the statement of accounts for 22-23. And really what I want to do is to pass over to Paul and Andy to give you their report on the audit findings report and the work that they've done on the accounts for 22-23. And we'll come back on any comments on that for committee in a few moments.
Yep, thanks, Sukhvinder. Thank you, Chair. So accompanying the statement of accounts, we have our audit findings reports for the 2022-23 year audits of the Council and Pension Fund financial statements. These audits have been completed during October through to February 24, and the audit was run concurrently, largely with the 21-22 audit. And as Sukhvinder's just stated, that was signed on the 22nd of February. So the 21-22 audit is closed and signed. The 22-23 audits are substantially complete. So I'm not going to talk you through the whole report. I'm just going to highlight the main points. The audits are substantially complete. The concurrent running of the 2 audits has required your finance team and our audit team to work collaboratively and closely across the 2 years. It has been a challenge for everyone, but it's a really positive outcome that we're at this stage of completion, and we've been able to complete the 22-23 audit quicker than the 21-22 audit with that sort of close working and going through sort of similar areas of the audit running concurrently has allowed us to work more efficiently on this audit. We expect to issue and sign unmodified opinions before the end of March. So that will be all of the audits caught up to the current year, and we'll be going into 23-24 planning shortly after that to go into the next year ready to sign off the audits in line with the government timetable after that. So yeah, the audit's substantially complete, as I said, subject to a small number of queries arising from our senior management file review and then checking the amended statements, which your team will provide us with at the end of this week, we anticipate. On pages 193 to 195 of the report, of your pack, your papers pack, we've presented our follow-up on the recommendations from the audit. A number of these will be familiar to you. So a lot of them are recommendations which were made in 21 to 22. And sort of unsurprisingly, given the concurrent preparation of the statements and running of the audits, those recommendations are ongoing, and we've just presented our findings and your finance team's updates on the progress on those recommendations. The audit adjustments are presented on pages 196 to 200 of the papers. It's positive that there's a smaller number of unadjusted issues in there. So there are a small number of unadjusted misstatements, but we were satisfied they were well below our materiality, and otherwise it's minor misclassifications and disclosure amendments there. So we were happy it was reasonable to leave those issues unadjusted as they were below our materiality. And on pages 201 and 202, we've presented our fees for the audit. And otherwise, I'd open up to questions on the report, really. That's all I'd highlight. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Do members of the committee have any questions? Councillor Adrian Pascal-Tilbrough.
Thank you very much. I've got a couple, if I may, but I'm sure we can sort of go around. The first refers to page 30 and the risks set out. And it might be because this is accounted for separately, but I'd be interested in the reasoning why housing was not put as a high-level risk.
Sorry, could you just repeat the last bit of the question? Which bit was not, you're querying why, what was not a significant risk for the audit? Housing?
Housing, yeah. So on the highest level risks table, it doesn't seem to be on there.
Sorry, which page are you referring to? Page 30. I think, yeah, I think you might be referring to the accounts, and I don't know if that's sort of going into the AGS. Mm-hmm. Is it if it's in the annual governance statement, then that's management's summary.
Of course, yeah. It's
sorry,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Chair, if I may, through you. So the review there talks about 22-23, and we understand that the HRA was under some financial stress during that period. But the council has done a tremendous amount of recovery and mitigation actions to address the position. So we started 22-23 with a deficit on the HRA of £4.1 million. That's been corrected, and we're now to 1.4 million during 23-24. And I'm pleased to say that going into 24-25, that deficit, which was reliant upon use of reserves, has been entirely eliminated. Okay, so I think the reference and moving forward for the future, the financial position on the HRA is in a much more stronger and a stable position. We've also set out the position on our minimum balances, which we will not go below 5 million. It's something that I've agreed with our external auditors. And we've also got other balances to take into account risks overall. I think the AGS does cover some of those items in there. When we get those signed off, that'll be stated in there as well.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to move to Councillor Patel, who had a question.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, can you hear? Yes. Firstly, I apologize for not being there in person. I'm not in good form at the moment. I really wanted to just ask the question about the fees of Grant Thornton on this. There's if you look at page 201 and 202, there's a fees column, and in both occasions the final fees have been federally model as opposed to proposed fees. Is there any explanation for that?
Thank you, Councillor. So the fee process for local government is quite complicated. So the fees in this report reflect the position of the PSAA contract for the 5-year period between 2018, 19 and 22, 23. And essentially where you start from is a scale fee that was set by PSAA, the base of which was many years ago. Since those contracts were agreed, there have been a whole series of additional audit requirements, some coming out of regulation, some coming out of changes in auditing standards. And so what PSAA have effectively done is taken that base scale fee, included a number of what they describe as bake-in, so additional things that are automatic on all audits, and the fees page sets out quite a lot of those. So you've got the base scale fee, you've got the bake-ins, which are sort of will happen at all audits, not Hammersmith in particular, but all audits, and then you've got some additional fees, which we're still to finalise for 22, 23 in terms of completion of the audit and some of the areas that we've had to have additional focus on. So that will all come out as a final fee. I mean, it is a messy process. It's a messy process. From 23-4 onwards, PSAA have set, there's a new contract, there's a new set of scale fees. The ambition, hopefully at least, is that those new scale fees have a degree more sort of resilience, and that we won't have any major deviations from those in the next contract period, unless there are major concerns at a particular authority. So that fee page is very clunky. There's a lot of areas in it, whereas ideally you'd probably want, this is the fee and this is the variation because of whatever issue came up, whereas all these things are not in the original scale fee. So that's why it's so long in terms of its number of different items. So obviously happy to take any further follow-up from that, Councillor.
Councillor Patel, do you have a follow-up question?
No, that's fine. I have another question on another matter, which I can come to in due course.
Okay, I think just as a matter of making a point, obviously for the committee, we have previously discussed the PSSA fees at length, and the framework of the PSSAA, and that the vast majority of councils are subscribed to this, and that there's very few that are not, and those that do struggle to undertake their statutory obligations for audit. It should also be, I think, worth remembering for members of the committee that the absence of an auditor of last resort has meant that there is a very limited number of players in the market. And given the exit of certain players from the market has meant that there is increasingly few people and few organizations capable of undertaking an audit of an organization such as ours, which has many and complex and far-reaching areas that need to be audited. So that does mean that it becomes an incredibly specialist skill. And given the how few companies are able to undertake it, that has meant that as a marketplace, there is very few options. But as mentioned by Paul, there has also been quite substantial changes in audit and the number of audits that need to be undertaken as well. So I obviously want to make that point as well. Councillor Chivot-Verdier.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to echo what you've just said, that we talk about this very often, and the auditors have explained to us. I mean, sometimes I know that in your audits, you have to go back to sometimes the Middle Ages to find some sources of income. You explained that to us last time around, how complicated it is. The tension between the increase in reporting requirements and diversity on the auditing market is something that this council has flagged in its consultations. By the way, I'm going to ask you about the upcoming consultations in the next items. We keep feeding back on this. We keep saying, yes, we want to be Scandinavian transparent democracy in this council. We're proud to be, but that has a cost. So, we need to strike the right balance between transparency but also reporting costs, because it's great to know absolutely everything, but then that does have a cost to people. So that was the first part of it. I suppose that the second part is more of a sort of, not really around, which is not, it's not a question. Well, it's more to say that we're looking at a statement of accounts. It almost feels like as if the Titanic actually made it to New York. The passengers would have never known how lucky they were. This feels like this is what we're looking at. This is a budget for a year after COVID, where funding is 10% down compared to pre-pandemic levels, where you've had, everyone gets one. Woking, bankrupt, Lib Dem. Thurrock, bankrupt, Tory. Croydon, bankrupt, Labour. And we're looking at accounts that show we haven't abdicated any of our duties, any of our policies, whether it's home care, whether it's free school meals, whether it's all the great things we do for our residents, and we've managed to maintain that. And I think that needs to be said each time we look at accounts, each time we talk about our finances. This council in 2022, 2023 has managed to stay the course. We haven't folded. We've actually, our auditors can say, stayed in a positive financial situation. That's not without any sacrifices, and that's not without creative thinking and difficult budgeting from cabinet members. So not a question, but more to put on the record. My appreciation for all the hard work that's going behind the scenes, because each of you are the reason why we can be here tonight and actually not look yet another year at a council's bankruptcy. So thank you to each of you for your hard work.
Thank you. I just want to ask a question myself. At previous committees, we have talked about the delays in certain councils auditing, and some councils going back quite substantially. Obviously, bringing us up to 22, 23, where does that kind of make us sit as a council in comparison to not even just councils of similar size, but overall in the local government field for audit?
Thank you, Chair. So being up to date, as Andy said earlier, we're looking to sign off this month. So where does that take you? That takes you comfortably into the top half, of councils. We're not entirely sure where the backstop 30th of September will land in terms of those that are having to be backstopped, but we feel it probably might be something like a 50-50 or a 60-40. From a Grant Fulton point of view, we're hoping to get much higher percentage than that. But overall, for all the reasons you described, Chair, previously about the market and particular issues at particular authorities, because they will have 4 or 5 years that are sort of backstopped. In terms of the position, I'm thinking between 50-60% will be done, and obviously Hammersmith will be in that, and Hammersmith will be in that 6 months before that deadline. And obviously, as it stands at the moment, my understanding of the figure is much lower. I mean, probably in the 20s to 30% as we speak, something like that, maybe slightly higher, but not much. So yeah, so in terms of you're going to go into the 23-4 audit signed off, clean opinion, no backstop issues. There's a whole world of complication for all those audits where there is a backstop and a disclaimer and all sorts of things. So it's really great to be in a position where none of those issues will apply here.
Councillor Pascal Tilbury.
Thank you very much. A question on a sort of point of transparency. In the accounts, where would a viewer be able to see figures related to income from various fines? I'm thinking specifically about fines related to traffic, to parking, and to the clean air neighbourhoods.
Chair, if I may. By nature, the statements are very summarized in total, the income and expenditure account, the balance sheet, and the movement in reserves statement. What I can do, Councillor Tilbury, is to send you a separate detailed analysis of that. The overall numbers will be within the environment department within our total expenditure.
I thought so. Thank you very much.
Okay. Chair, if I may, I wanted to speak earlier on the point that you were saying about the fees that Councillor Patel had asked about. I think you and Councillor Verdier identified all the key issues. The council is an immensely complex organisation with hundreds of millions of pounds on revenue and capital spend, collection funds and so on. I personally feel reassured that our external auditors can come to you and say to you as an independent review of the financial statements and the financial affairs of this council, that the council is doing as well as it can be and doing many, many better than many others. The fee levels in there that you see at the moment, the 200,000, I'm sure if I recollect from memory, but they're about 50% of what they were in cash terms 5-10 years ago, is what David has always said. So we've had the PSSC arrangements. I know there'll be a slight uplift, but I think it's an investment worthwhile making for the residents, the stakeholders of the council and our external partners. They can be reassured that the council is well managed financially.
Thank you, Sukhvinder. I'm going to bring in Councillor Patel.
Thank you, Chair. Just for a point of clarification, the point I raised wasn't meant to be a criticism. As has been said by previous councillors, we've done a first-class job, and congratulations to everyone. It was merely seeking clarification on the figures as stated. That's all.
Very good. Okay, is there any more questions? Councillor Pascal.
Thank you very much. Turning to page 70, at the bottom of the page, there's something about debtors, and there seems to be a reasonable amount of money there. Could you just unpick about what is being done to make sure that the debt owed to the council is recovered?
So the council is taking some active steps to manage the overall position of the debt overall. We've got a debt board established that's looking at all the various amounts that we're owed across all our collection funds, residence debts, business debts, and so on. I'm pleased to say that the overall position has improved. So currently we're expecting about an £9 million improvement on the total amounts owed, and that's all the work that the council officers have been undertaking to improve that position for the council overall. I don't know whether, James, you want to add any more?
Yeah, so I chair the debt board, which looks at all of our debt across all the different types, so notably business rates and council tax, and we're looking at the most efficient ways to collect, looking at how our processes and procedures within, and how we actually try and maximise that collection, because obviously the more we collect, the better our performance, and the less money we need to put in provision to actually cover bad debt, and the less we're therefore looking for savings from other directorates.
I suppose this is a question for the Cabinet Member for Finance. Looking at the report here, one of the things that seems to come up is about the question of the long-term financial position. Looking at what seems to be the impact of single-year settlements, how much of a concern do you think that is in terms of the longer-term plans for the addressing of concerns that are raised in the report?
Yeah, thank you very much. Look, I think everyone's aware of the difficult state of local government finances. We've said in this authority since 2010, we've had a 56% decrease in the amount of funding that we get from central government. So even with the best will, it's very difficult to put together meaningful long-term budgets when you have this degree of a lack of funding. What makes it so much harder is the very chaotic way in which local government finance is managed from central government. So this year we had, you're absolutely right to say, a one-year financial settlement. This is the 6th one-year financial settlement we've had in a row now. We got this one on the 18th of December, so literally a week before Christmas Day. There's no reason why we need to get this information so late on in the day. You know, we've got to pass our budget in February. We even had this year additional measures for local government finance announced in the budget, which came out after we'd had to set our budget here in Hammersmith and Fulham. So this chaotic way that central government goes about managing local government finances makes it an awful lot harder. The way that we try and go about addressing this here in H&F is to set quite small c conservative assumptions when it comes to setting budgets. So we build in quite a large amount of policy contingencies. We plan for high inflation levels. You know, we tend to try and work out the worst case scenario, and then central government goes about meeting that year in, year out. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Single year settlements are one of the myriad of factors that make it a lot harder to manage local government finance. I'm hoping that, and I don't think there's no ideological reason why, you know, a right-wing government would do single year settlements. Yeah, I'm hoping this is something that whoever is running the country in the next few years will be able to address. I don't think it's an ideological thing. I think it's just a competence thing at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Patel.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise on page 236, 235, the council dealing with pensions. There's a reference there to Aviva investors. I'm fully aware that this is the audit for 2022-23, but subsequently a decision was made by the council to redeem the units in the Aviva fund. Has there been any progress on that at all? And how far we are down the line in the redemption? Or is that something appropriate for this committee to answer?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, Councillor Patel, you're absolutely right that the council had made a decision to divest in that fund. We have tried to secure, and we're getting some of the returns back now. They've been partially paid. I think the last pensions committee had a very detailed consideration of the matter, and the Aviva sort of directors were there to respond to that. I think we've given them a deadline to the end of June to totally divest all the funding for that and return the council the amounts that's due on that.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Councillor Patel. In the last pension fund committee, we found out that well, first of all, we were advised by our advisors, then Deloitte, now Ezio, to disinvest from the Aviva fund. And so it turns out that we, as a committee, we're one of the first parties to disinvest, which put us at the forefront of getting our money back. Now, the problem is that Aviva has actually failed to sell a number of assets to enable us to do that. And we've only recovered parts of our funds. And some of the things we've highlighted at last committee was that, well, whilst we actually technically are still in the fund longer than we had expected, we still pay management fees. And we're not happy about many of those elements. And we've highlighted that to the people who came, who I wasn't very satisfied about personally, but yeah, we're hoping to get our money soon. We are going to be very strict on that, and we're going to seek ways that we can get some money back, because that's not right, and it's not a situation that we have put ourselves in, but they have put themselves in. So I appreciate your frustration, but yeah.
Thank you very much. Quite a difficult one, I'm afraid. But on 82, we turn to the issue of official remuneration. And I very much welcome the transparency with which senior officers' remuneration has been set out on page 81. On the next page, we find that there are a few employees who are earning, very, very serious money, one of whom is actually in the 165 to 169,000 bracket, meaning that they earn more than the Prime Minister. These are not senior employees. And I do think that there's a risk that this begs the question of what's the job description of these people? Who are they? It's a transparency question. Might there be a way to increase the transparency of people doing non-senior jobs for what seems to me to be very senior money?
Chair, I'll try to respond to that as best as I can. So note 25 to the financial statements discloses the the remuneration packages for all the senior statutory officers of the council. There is some further analysis in the overall report that set out some pay bands for officers across the council from 50,000 upwards overall. So that analysis is there. I can't comment on anything more than that. The details are in the statement. We comply with what we're required to discharge and report formally, which we do.
It's very much in keeping with the statutory requirements of reporting. So it's that you've got that high level in terms of the chief exec and all the people that report directly to the chief exec. And then below that, in terms of those bandings, that's exactly what we're required to do per the per SIPFA requirements. Yeah.
So I suspected that would be the case, but thank you.
Councillor Patel.
I think you're on mute.
Chair, I have no further questions. I think I've raised my hand.
Yep, thank you. Are there any further questions? Councillor Ree.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to put on record my thanks to Grant Thornton for all the work that goes into preparing an audit. Documents like this are hugely important, firstly for reassuring residents and the people that we as a council do business with. They need to know that we're in a stable financial position, and I think this report does a good job of demonstrating that. So thank you very much for all the work you've put in. It's also incredibly helpful for us. It gives us a chance to consider the way that we go about doing things as a council, and we're always looking for opportunities to learn and to improve the way that we do things. So so thank you very much for doing that. This is all particularly important at a time when it's important at all times, but at a time when there is so little money around in local government, it's really important to make sure that we're squeezing every penny out of the council and the way that it operates. Just to pick up on a couple of the points that came up in the discussion, I thought it was a really good discussion actually. We covered the HRA, and I think it's absolutely right to ask about that, because I mean, this is one of the things that when I first got the role, this was I suppose the issue that kept me up at night. I suppose the thing that I think, as Linda said, it's absolutely right to say that the position is now a lot more stable. I always find that when you're looking at the HRA through the lens of an audit report, it's very much like driving a car just by looking at your rear view mirror, right? You can see what's come before, but it doesn't necessarily give you that view of the future. Yeah. We've published now our 10-year business plan for the HRA. We've set out how it is we're stabilising the reserves and going to start adding to those reserves as the years go on. So I'm confident now that we're in a much stronger position when it comes to that. But it's absolutely something that's right to scrutinise, and you know, we know why we're in this situation, and it's absolutely right to spend the money where we need to. But by the same token, it's absolutely right to make sure that we have money set aside for the future. And so you know, I do welcome the scrutiny on that. So thank you very much for bringing it up. We also heard about the work of the debt board and the work that James is doing on that. And that's, again, hugely important. It's not unusual for authorities to be owed money, you know, by nature of the way that lots of the contracts that we have work. Will be you know, potentially providing services and then charging later on for them, or we'll be charging money on services that we're going to be getting later on. And so there's always a case of managing money coming in and when we get it. Also, when it comes to things like council tax, business rates, we know that the difficult economic situation that we're in a recession now. We know that that's going to impact people's ability to pay. So it's not unusual that people will need a bit more time to pay. And so because of our ethical debt collection policy, we're very keen to make sure that people aren't put under unnecessary financial hardship when it comes to paying. But by the same token, we are making sure that they do pay. You know, there's no such thing as a free lunch, and we're making sure that everybody is paying for the services that they receive. And so that's why this is very important. And then just turning to the audit itself, I think I think the chair is very accurately set out the position that we find ourselves in with the audit market, right? It's a hugely difficult market. The amount of demand isn't going down. Everyone needs to be audited. But the supply of people able to provide those services, we know you guys are in great demand at the moment, and it's hard to find people with the skills that you guys have got in order to provide these reviews and to sign up these accounts. So we're very grateful for your time, and we know how hard you must be working at the moment. I think my question, which took me a while to get round to, but the question I suppose I'd ask is, compared to some of the other councils that Councillor Chabot-Verdier mentioned, I think the findings here are relatively minor. I know that you guys are going to have an awful lot of work that you're going to be doing over the next few months before we get to that hard September deadline. I think it'd be great if we could sign off 3 years worth of accounts within the financial year. So by the end of the month, you say the work is substantially complete. Could we get a confirmation that we'll be able to get it done by the end of March?
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely our commitment to do that. We've got the people to do that. We've got the final set of queries being lined up with officers that need to gone through as the person signing the accounts. I've gone through the vast majority of the audit work, and I've raised a few points, but I'm largely satisfied with that. So, very clear target to sign by the end of the month. The closing process is a bit tricky because it requires a whole set of signatures to be gained and things like that, but absolutely committed to do that, and committed to get 23/4 done this calendar year. So the point about having 3 audits signed off this year absolutely is our target. I think one of the benefits, I think, to some degree, of the backstop process government has put in place is it has sharpened people's focus and people's minds in terms of either not wanting to be backstopped or auditors not wanting to be involved in that if it doesn't happen. So everyone's focused on those deadlines. And the new contract the PSAA put in place for 23/4 is very much a payment by results contract. So the fee that we'll bring to the next audit committee in terms of the audit plan, we won't be getting all of that fee unless we sign your accounts off, essentially. So there's a real strong incentive for us to make sure we push that. And I mean, there are challenges in the market, and there are difficulties in dealing with some of these backstopped audits, and the process for doing that is still uncertain. There's a timetable, a time frame, but it's the volume of work is still uncertain for those audits. So what we're in discussion with government and with the FRC about, the reality is there's only that number of auditors in the country. They can only do 1 audit at a time. We can't have 1.5 audits done because that would create a backlog again. The government have set out clearly an aspiration effectively to have all audits signed by the 31st of May 25 at the latest for 23/4. So what they don't want to happen is for that, not to have a very high percentage done by that date. And so all the stakeholders have got to work together to make sure that happens. I don't think there's any risks vis-a-vis that date for this council, but the broader outlook, especially when you've got the challenges that have been set out at the Thurrocks and Croydons and others, that requires a huge amount of senior audit time, or it should do. I don't think it always has actually, but it should do. And we spend an awful lot of time at senior level on our challenging audits. So coming back to the whole point about local government finance and local government support, we do need to find a way to make that better, because otherwise we're going to be on a slippery slope where officers, auditors, and the whole system starts to drift back again because there's so many issues to deal with that the auditor having to deal with those issues rather than having a more routine audit of the accounts, which obviously once was the case.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any final questions? Okay, in that case, I will move to the recommendations, and there is a total of 7 recommendations. First, to approve the 22-23 annual governance statements, which is included in the statement of accounts, that's Appendix 1. To Number two, to approve the statement of accounts 22-23, including the pension fund accounts, that's also included in Appendix 1. 3, to note the content of the external auditor's audit findings report, that's the ISA 260, including the auditor's findings, recommendations, and the council's response to those recommendations, that's in Appendix 2. 4, to approve the 22-23 management representation letter, that's in Appendices 3 and 4. 5, to approve the pension fund annual report 22-23, that's in Appendix 5. And to note the accounts remain unaudited until after final sign off by the external auditor. And finally, to delegate the authority to the chair of the committee, myself, in consultation with the Director of Finance, to approve any further adjustments to Appendixes 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, which may be required as part of the completion of the audit work. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. And thank you to Andy and Paul, and of course to James, everybody else. I'm going to move along then to item 5, the external auditor's progress and sector update. And could I ask Paul Dossett from Grant Thornton to introduce this item, and also attending on this is Andy, as well as Skvinder and James. Over to you.
I wouldn't say much more about this report, to be honest. It's a brief report just summarising progress. It summarises everything we've just discussed. There's not really any new information. There's some sector update slides which are useful and kind of interesting reading, but other than that, it's what we've already discussed. So unless I open up for questions, but
do members have any questions? Councillor Chivot-Verdier.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick one on the consultations that DLUC and the NAO have put out. I don't know if you as an institution are planning on responding, or maybe the officers are planning on responding, but if you do, if you could just circulate your response with us, because it'd be interesting to get your point of view.
Yeah, we'll do, Councillor. I'll double check back at the office, but we have done a formal response from the firm, so well, I'll just check whether that's a public document or not.
Any other queries? Okay. In that case, I will just make one comment, is to say, obviously, from reading in obviously the discussion earlier, it does seem positive that there does seem to be an open culture of transferring information in a timely fashion. Obviously, that's great to see, and obviously that has had some net benefits in terms of the delivery of audits on time. And obviously, I hope that is a culture and a tradition that can continue. In that case, I'm going to move along to the recommendation. And there's only one recommendation, which is, do members agree to note the external auditor's progress report and sector update? Is that agreed?
No, it's agreed.
Perfect, thank you. And moving along then to item 6, the internal audit progress report for April 23 through to January 24. And could I ask Maura Mackey to introduce this item? And also attending on this item is David and Jules.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Maura Mackey, the Head of Internal Audit, and this is our regular course, roughly quarterly update on the audit activity, in the year so far. There's obviously a bit of a time lag, as happens with these things, but when the report was written, this was fairly accurate, but work is flowing through. On paragraph 4, you can see there that we've actually completed 6 pieces of work, all positive assurance, which is good. And we've made some good progress with the follow-up work, which is where we go back to check to see whether our recommendations have been implemented. And I would reiterate that we go until we have a satisfactory solution there. It may be that a recommendation gets superseded by something else, but that's fine. But we do go back to check because that's a very important aspect of our work. On Appendix 1 summarises the work completed to date, which, as you can see, is all positive assurance so far. I mean, which is great. There's some advisory work there. Just to remind the committee that we do sometimes do work where we don't issue an assurance report, and that's usually because something's happening there, some change maybe, where we've been asked to go and support them to get the right process and controls in place. So it wouldn't be the right it wouldn't be appropriate for us to go and audit it to tell them what they already know. So we're working with them to get to a good place, and that most likely would get audited in a future year as a part of our cycle of work. In Appendix 2, that's a summary of the work that was potentially going to be undertaken in the year and where we are with it. So there are 3 audits showing there is draft reports issued fairly recently. We're liaising with the services to get responses on those before they are finalised, but hopefully that will be quite soon. There are also in progress due to start. Some of those are moving towards being draft. I think one or two of them have now gone out as draft. So we're fairly confident that we'll get to the right place. It's going to be tight. It's always tight. The last quarter is always the busiest. But by the time we come to do the annual report, I'm happy that we will have got sufficient of that work completed to be included in there. There are a few things in there which are not technically a report. They're more, again, where we've been monitoring, looking at other sources of assurance, particularly in like the pensions admin area, where there's quite a lot of scrutiny on that anyway, which is provided to the council by a separate company, isn't it? The admin service, and David goes to the pensions committee on that. So we look at what they get as assurance in those areas rather than duplicate what they're doing. But we will also potentially pick up some additional work if that would be appropriate. There are quite a few things that are showing us not yet due. Some of these will happen, some of these won't. It's a very flexible plan, which we'll come on to in the next paper. And there are also a number of things that have been deferred, which were deferred for very good reasons. Either there was a change in the service, there could have been some of the schools we have to defer if there's been a change of staffing and they need a bit more time to get things back up to speed. And some places it's no longer relevant, so we would maybe look at something different. So just overall, I'd just like to say that I believe we've got the coverage in there. We'll be able to give you an assurance opinion for the year end, and where we can, we'll pick up on any pieces of work that we think are important into the next year's plan where appropriate. That was all I was going to say. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Maura. I just wanted to obviously start obviously by saying it's great to see that there is a high number of reports that there is already a substantial level of assurance. Just on the matter of the items that are being deferred, obviously, as you say, some of these items, it's due to certain staffing arrangements, particularly if it's something like schools where there's been changes of administration or staff turnover, and other items where it's no longer relevant for audit. But for the items that are being deferred into the 24-25 period, obviously this does increase your own workload on top of the other regular audits that you would expect to undertake. My question is really just in terms of the undertaking of such a workload and the capacity of you and your team to undertake the already scheduled workload in addition to this deferred work as well.
Well, thank you for the question. I mean, we take a risk-based approach to the plan. So then it may be that there are some things that may be due for an audit next year that are lower down on the priority list because of the risks at the time. There's a couple of things I know that are being carried forward, which we really would like to do because they've been carried forward for more than 1 year. There are reasons for that because of new processes that are taking time to embed. But that might mean we don't do something else which isn't so significant because it may be just a cyclical piece and we can get some assurance from elsewhere. We do try to get as much assurance from other sources as well, but it shouldn't compromise the plan. And I'm confident that we have enough resources and we're funded for enough resources to achieve the plan.
Thank you. I'm going to refer to Councillor Patel.
Chair, thank you. The audit plan of 3 + 9 month plan, as stated in paragraph 2 on page 381. 3 months seems a very short time to me. I'm just wondering, doesn't that entail a role of duplication of work perhaps? I mean, I know from being on various committees that 3 months is really a very short period of time. Perhaps that should be extended to 6 months, 6+6 month plan, perhaps as an alternative. Can we have some comments on that?
That's very helpful, Councillor Patel. So we've started the 3+9 approach during COVID. So, and we've found since then, as with colleagues across the sector, that actually the areas of focus and risk change more quickly now in local government than they did in the past. So what we do is we fix the 3 months to be very clear about the work we're doing in the next quarter. And we have the 9 months to be able to say, these are the kind of things we want to be able to do, the service wants us to do. And that gives them the flexibility. It means we review with them every quarter what we've done, what we're about to do, whether what we're doing is having the value that they want. So I think we've got a much better relationship with services and giving them a better service, and hopefully then giving you as a committee better assurance, because we're focusing on the key risks that the services have in their minds as we approach each quarter. In the past, you'd have a year's plan. By the end of the year, the plan would be irrelevant because so many of the risks had changed. So we're trying to make sure we use our resources effectively to actually focus on the key risks that are in front of us going into the next quarter. I mean, we look at, as I say, many of the things in the +9 will be done. Some may be done later, some may be done differently. But we do work with directors very closely to make sure we've got the right risks as we approach each quarter's work.
Thank you. Councillor Pascal Tolborough.
Thank you very much. Just a quick one from me. Are there any recommendations, particularly high priority recommendations, that emerge from the work done so far that would be of interest to this committee?
Sorry. I did check just before the meeting actually, and there were no significant recommendations that I think would be of interest to the committee there. I know I can't say what's coming down the line. So the annual report will obviously include the last few pieces of work in there, and inevitably those are the more complicated ones and the ones that may have a few more issues in them. So I think the annual report is where you'll see that. You'll see that in the summertime, but we'll make sure that you're fully aware of what's going to be in there as well. It's normally the case that, as I say, the more complex ones take a little bit of time to get over the line.
If the committee would like it, Chair, what we can do in future reports is look to build to show you the recommendations which are overdue, and we're following up again. So you get an assurance actually they're not high risk typically, but if that helps the committee to see where we are with those, you get a bit more information about what's not been completed yet.
That'd be great. Sure. One final question for myself is just in terms of the schools. If memory serves me correctly, we have had some discussion about the auditing of schools in previous committee or meetings of this committee. And one of the issues that seems to have been raised or become apparent is the with the change in administration and the turnover of the schools administration is the challenge for new incumbents to take up that fold and prepare for an audit, and the accounting practices and how that's being managed. Could you speak to any changes or any developments that have taken place to support those that are coming into those positions so that the auditing of schools can be better undertaken?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So we've actually taken the audit of schools back in-house. So the in-house team does all of the school audits now at Hammersmith, Kensington and Westminster. We've spent a lot of time reviewing the programme, reaching out to the schools that we're going to be auditing, to go through. And we're also quite willing to, if they need it, give them a bit of help if they've got new staff in. It is a complex area. And auditing it can be quite complex for what it, you think of it, it's quite a small sort of package, but it's a bit of mini business really, and there's lots of elements there that we have to look at. We also liaise quite closely with the sort of the governance team for schools and the finance team that are based at the council to get their views on things. And I know that the school's finance team also support the schools quite a lot where they've got challenges, because it's important for them because they have requirements that they have to report and do returns by a certain date. They always share with us the financial returns that the schools have done, so that helps inform us on our school audits. And we've always been willing to go out and provide support if they need it in a particular area, if they've had a particular problem. The one thing I would say is that if they have had some significant changes, I wouldn't force an audit on them unless there was a concern expressed by the council, because it's not helpful. We want the audit to be helpful and to show that they do have good governance and good financial management. So we want it to be as positive as it can be. And we are very mindful, obviously, of the Ofsted side of things, and we don't do the work in that way. It's planned in advance. They have sufficient notice, and we're always available for them to ask questions. So, yeah.
Thank you. That's very encouraging to hear. Are there any final questions? Okay. In that case, I'm going to move to the recommendation, and there's just a one recommendation. Do members agree to note the report?
Noted.
Perfect. And then moving along to item 7, which is the draft internal audit plan for 24-25. Could I ask Maura to introduce the item, and also attending on this is David and, sorry, is it Jules or Julius? Jules, my apologies. Maura.
Thank you, Chair. So as alluded to in the last report, this is a possible plan for next year, shall we call it. It's very, very difficult. It's becoming more difficult to plan ahead. I need to have more meetings still. It's quite a detailed process, but this is an indicative plan of what we hope to do in the year, but with the focus being on the first 3 months, which obviously isn't too far away. What we try to do is obviously look at what are the key risks in the council at the time. And I did quickly double check, and I think they're still the same as they were in November. So that's good, because obviously I have to look at the previous risks that were published. And as things change during the year, that should get reflected in the plan. And from my meetings, as I say, I still have quite a lot of meetings to have. So really only focusing on things that we think could be done in the first quarter. I think there's probably more we can bring into the first quarter, but until I've had those meetings, it's hard to say. So I've tried to give you an indication of what we'll be covering, or we'd like to cover, and how that links to the council's risks and priorities. I've also included in here an indication of what the fraud service do, the counter fraud service, because obviously they do some work which helps in the fact that I don't necessarily have to do work in those areas, because they're proactively looking at them. And in some cases they are reactively, and they might liaise with us about audit work that might be important in an area of weakness. A lot of the work that we do is cross-cutting, so it's not, you can't pin it down to one department. As you can see at the beginning there, it's things that could impact on it a number of different departments, but it helps to give a corporate picture once we've done some of that work. There's some very broad headings in there, I admit, which we'll fine tune once we've had those meetings with the key departments. And David and I talked about this a lot. We have what we call as a strategic plan, which is in Appendix 2, and that's where we've kind of gone through. And I think in the old days they used to call it what did they call it? A 5-year plan or something. Literally, people used to plan 5 years in advance, and you just turn the handle and so this is a strategic plan. So we try to identify the key different things that the council would be doing, what the risks are, and how often we should look at them, so that we don't miss something. That's the idea. But as we all know, things change, priorities change, but we still refer back to that just to make sure that we aren't missing anything that really ought to be looked at in a 5-year cycle. So that's just part of it. So that's in the appendix to show that we do have a process, and we do monitor what we do, and we do look at what we ought to be doing, and then we look at what are the priorities and how we can perhaps pull those together to make sense, so that it's not purely, as David said many times, not a reactive plan. There are some proactive elements in there. How we present this going in the future, we're talking about that, because we think there's better ways of presenting this information to you, so that you can see more clearly what we're meant to be doing and when we're going to be doing it, and then you can say, have you done it? So it's a draft. Every quarter that I come back to in the next year will have an indication of the progress against the plan and what we're looking to do in the next quarter. So hopefully that will become a little bit more clear for you. But as it stands, we should produce a plan, and we have produced a plan, but it's a very early draft.
If I might just add, Chair, so this way of flexible planning is something that's done quite commonly across London now, and actually the new global internal audit standards that came out in February, which actually come into force next February, encourages flexibility of audit planning. So what we'll do is a paper for you later in the year as a committee, which sets out what the new global internal audit standards both require of us as internal audit, but also best practice in terms of what audit committees do as well. So it'd be helpful to be able to see that as well. I think it's useful to know that we're not alone in this approach, where this is quite common in the sector now, and it does mean we can focus on those sort of key risks. And as Maureen's alluded to, I think we want to work out how we can demonstrate our assurance around the council's objectives and priorities as well, to make so you can see that we're covering, the council's key priorities as well as the risks. So you get that flavour of the assurance we're getting in those key priority areas.
Thank you very much to Moira and to David. Is there any questions for members of the committee? Councillor Chivot-Verdier.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for explaining the attempted focus between sort of having a long-term plan, but also the flexibility to be able to react to new priorities that crop up. In your report, you talk about wanting to increase attendance on working groups, where real-time inputs to projects and initiatives would be useful. So I was wondering if you could talk to us more about this. I'm asking you this question because in my day job, in my world, we see a number of working groups crop up across government departments, but they often lack the transparency. So we don't have minutes or membership or just even meeting dates. So I was wondering how can we have those that are more agile and flexible, but how do we keep the transparency element? Does that affect it at all? Or is it, if you could tell us more about that?
So I can give some examples, Councillor, of the working groups I sit on. So there's one around the Civic Campus Programme, which meets regularly. So there's really good governance arrangements there. So myself and Jules are providing that sort of independent risk challenge. So again, that's helping to make sure internally that officers are recognising the key risks. They've got actually mitigations in place, and they're seeing if those mitigations are actually doing what they're supposed to do. We've done a lot of work with housing in the last 12, 18 months around repairs. Again, the repairs improvement programme, working alongside colleagues there. So rather than coming and doing an audit, we're sitting alongside them to help them make sure they've got the risks assessed, make sure the action plans are robust, make sure they're being monitored and tracked, to make sure the risks are being tracked accordingly as well. So there's a couple of examples where we're currently actively involved in those things, but we don't do a sort of a formal report at the end of the process because the way the programmes operate. But it's something perhaps we can think about how we put a bit more in our internal audit updates about what we're doing on those would be helpful.
I think it would be helpful. Now, the entire evening we've discussed, even I said, the problem about asking you to report more and the strain, it'll be on you and your teams, but to maybe understand what the working groups are, just for a scale list, to just understand where is it that your team are intervening to support our fantastic council workers to get through those audits would be helpful.
Thank you. Can we move to Councillor Patel?
Thank you, Chair. Just a query on the internal audit plan for 24-25, Appendix 1, page 394. There's a reference there for readiness for voter ID and postal voting controls under elections. Is that rather late, bearing in mind that we have a mayoral election coming up on the 2nd of May and a general election before January 2025?
So again, if I may, Chair, this is a good example of where rather than doing a traditional piece of work, we'll work alongside officers to look at what they're doing as the process is working to give assurance. So again, it's something I've done elsewhere, and it's a way of both giving assurance but also helping to improve the controls. So we've got, obviously, as the council says, 2 sets of elections coming up, and the ones particularly around the general election, I think, which is where voter ID will be much more prevalent as an issue. We want to make sure we're working with elections colleagues in advance of that, but also during the process as well, without impeding on the flow of the postal votes and everything else that's coming through. To make sure that election works successfully.
Thank you. Are there any? Oh, Councillor Ree.
Sorry, if I could just provide a bit more reassurance on that last point. I know this is something that Coyote, Zoe, and the whole electoral services team have been working on, flat out over the last few months. We've been looking at reports from elections that have taken place elsewhere in the country. We know we've had a couple of London boroughs where there have been borough-wide elections under the new system. So this is very much something that the team are alive to and have been looking into over the last few months.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know, this is maybe a question to the other members as well as the cabinet member, but by the next meeting, which is the 17th of June, we will have had the mayor's election for sure, and possibly another general election too. But I was wondering would you be in any position to present some kind of report on that topic by then?
So we'll be able to provide an update on the work we've done then, councillor, absolutely.
Yeah, that'd be great, if that's okay with you, Chair.
That would be agreeable if members are agreed. Yeah, okay. That would be appreciated. Any other questions? Okay, in that case, I'm going to move to the recommendations, and there are two. First is to note the early draft of the annual audit plan as set out in Appendix 1, and recommendation 2 to note the draft strategic audit plan as set out in Appendix 2. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Perfect, thank you. In that case, moving along to the risk management update. This item is included as an appendix that contains exempt information. Sorry. Okay. Sorry. This item includes an appendix that contains exempt information. Discussion of appendices will require passing the proceeds resolution at the end of the agenda, which will exclude members of the public and the press. This item includes, do members agree to pass the proposed resolution under item 10 below? Agreed. Perfect, thank you. In that case, could, sorry. So could officers introduce the report for now?
So, Chair, you have in your pack the risk update, which includes a summary from Jules, which I'll get him to speak to in a second, around some of the changes in the register since November. And we've just made some changes to the way in which the register is presented. So you can see in grey information that was there previously for you, and in the black text is information that's been added newly to the register since November. So I'll just hand over to Jules briefly to give you some of the key highlights.
Thank you, David. So there have been the SLT has been through the risk register and agreed them in advance of this meeting. There hasn't been a significant change in the number of risks, because of course they tend to be statutory risks which affect the council over a long term. There are no new risks added. There's a single risk removed because it remained on green for I think 3 quarters. And we felt that therefore it was beneficial to just remove it from site. We will continue to monitor it. Risk 14 has been reduced from a level of 4 to 3, which obviously therefore remains. It is also under our focus. A slight change to risk number 20, which is financial management in year 23-24 and medium-term planning for social care, which reflects the ongoing pressures around funding, around inflation, and this is the general market volatility. And several risks have had some textual changes, which, as David pointed out, we're now showing in black text as opposed to the sort of the grey text, where there has been no movement.
Do members have any questions on the risk? Councillor Shilofedi.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, actually, I want to talk about risk number 4, which is one of the risks that we've made a lot of progress on, and this is namely to talk about the impact that. Did I get this right? Or maybe not. But anyway, to talk about the fact that we've joined the London Fraud Hub, which is something that I've been very keen to discuss in this committee. Because, as everyone will know, shared fraud signals, fraud has become the #1 crime in the UK, well ahead of all the others. And shared fraud signals is an egg that everyone is trying to crack absolutely everywhere. So good to see that as a local authority on something we're ahead of the private sector. So I wanted to ask you, obviously there was an initiative, so I did a bit of research on this. tried to take off in 2019, and then this didn't. So my first question on this topic was, could you tell us how it differs from that initiative and hopefully reassure us that it won't fail this time?
Indeed, Councillor. So the first initiative back in 2019 was developed by SIPFA, which is the professional body for local authority accountants, and a private sector firm. It was actually the design of it was actually was very good, but actually the costs for local authorities for joining was prohibitive. So this was the key barrier to local authorities who do data matching already. So through the National Fraud Initiative, we match data every 2 years. This was obviously going to be dynamic and real time data matching. Eventually, that was SIPFA decided that wasn't viable to continue because authorities weren't going to sign up because of the prohibitive costs. So London boroughs in particular, and boroughs across the country, including Andy, our head of fraud, worked with the Cabinet Office who run the National Fraud Initiative, and they've developed this NFI Fraud Hub. So they're the people who run the biannual fraud exercise, data matching exercise. Then they've now created this fraud hub, which I think 20 London boroughs have now signed up to so far. It's very reasonably priced, and we put in data every month across a whole range of data sets, which are being increased as time goes on. It means we can match data with other boroughs, so particularly around tenancy fraud, parking fraud, staff and moonlighting, which we talked about here before. It's because we've got all this data being pulled in. We've got a number of the umbrella agencies for agency work now who also joined the scheme. So they're putting in their agency data as well, so we can see across boroughs. As members will know, with many things, crime in general, criminals don't recognise or respect boundaries. So you'll have people committing tenancy fraud in one borough, may well be doing another borough as well. So there's lots of opportunities in London particularly to see that real chance to get lots of data. We've had some quite good indications from the initial match with the agencies, which we're following through currently. So we hope to report to you next time around as to what we've seen across London there. So there's a quite interesting picture there. We're quite keen to work, and we do work with the Cabinet Office, see how we can develop this further to put more data sets in, to again, not just detect fraud, but the beauty of this is it's going to be made available to frontline staff who are checking eligibility for services. So they can do dynamic checks to see if there's a concern or a flag or somebody's given access to a service. So again, prevents it rather than having to detect it later. We're also working with the council's BI team on something quite innovative, which is effectively an internal fraud hub where we're sharing data across the regulatory investigative functions within the council. So again, sort of more broadly looking at that data within the council. And again, that will become available to frontline staff as well to be able to check if there are flags or concerns that one team is investigating that another team needs to know about a particular property or about a person going forward. So I think there's some quite exciting things we're doing here at Hammersmith and Fulham, which are helping to lead on particularly the BI work as well, which I think is really encouraging. And given that as Councillor Rees said, the kind of financial pressures for Hammersmith and Fulham, I think it's really important we're doing all we can to tackle fraud, because actually when you detect a fraud, trying to resolve it and to get your property back or your money back is a lot more difficult, more expensive than stopping it happening in the first place. So having these tools that do both is really, really important.
Yeah, thank you. That's really, really inspiring. And you've touched on the element of enabling people to check availability for social services. I mean, it's a little known fact in this country, about 40% of people can't prove who they are because they have no identity documents at all, birth certificates or identity documents. How do you see this expanding into something that people could rely on for that? Is that something that we already have in council? And then the second question is, if we've put in agencies, is there further space for the private sector in this?
There's the potential for that, definitely, yes. So I think that's something we would want to talk about, business cases with the NFI fraud hub, about if there are particular areas where there are concerns. So NHS might be one, there might be areas of the private sector another. I think, for me, this ability to be able to put this data together and see what it shows and actually do something with it proactively as well as reactively is really important. The other bit I forgot to mention, sorry, which Councillor Rees will be interested as well, is that there's some work we're doing with the BI team around how we can use this for debt targeting and debt recovery as well. So again, it's not just about preventing fraud, it's about looking at how we can capture and deal with some of the debts that the council faces as well.
Councillor Rees.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think this is a really interesting area, and the the team are doing fantastic work here, really sort of cutting edge stuff. And I understand you had a bit of a big win today, right, with the housing fraud case. Do you want to say a little bit about that? Okay, yeah. There, of course, I can imagine. Yeah, as David says, part of the ability that this extra data gives us is a chance to investigate people across the borough, looking at all sorts of services. And today we found out that somebody has been prosecuted. They've been given a 16-month suspended prison sentence because of housing tenancy fraud in the Clematley estate that we were able to pick up. There was a lot of work dealing with, I think, European agencies as well, tracking this guy's movements between countries to prove that he was committing fraud. But it's because of the data sharing and the innovative approach that we take to stopping fraud that we're able to track down people like this who are really trying to take the rest of the residents for a ride by committing frauds like this.
That's really positive news to hear about the effectiveness and the results. So congratulations. Councillor Patel.
Thank you, Chair. On page 412, there's a reference to unable to obtain talented people in key posts. Can we have some information about that? It's something which has reappeared on previous reports from my recollection. There's also a reference to, there's a deep dive to analyze chum more closely. Perhaps that can be explained. I'm not really quite sure what that means. Thank you, Chair.
So there are across the council and across councils in London in particular, some areas where there are particular skill shortages. Some areas where there are shortages because there aren't the qualified people to do the work. I mean, internal audit's a good example where we're trying to grow our own apprentices because actually it's difficult to recruit people. And I Paul in the external audit sector will have the same sort of issues. There are other sectors like social care where actually the agencies are attracting people away from permanent employment into agency work because the rates are better. So there's lots of work being done in a number of areas to try and look at how the council does what it can to make the offer as attractive as possible to those areas where it's known that there are either skill shortages and training people up, or where there's attraction to go and work in the private sector to be sold back into the public sector. And that's common in things like social care, environmental health, IT is another good example. Lots of areas across the council's sort of portfolio of services where there are some real pressures. So that churn, how quickly people come and go, is something that's really important to monitor, but also how do we make the proposition as attractive as we can for people to come and work with Hammersmith and Fulham.
Is there any other questions? Okay, in that case, I'll just make one brief comment, which is to say, obviously, it is good to see that some risks have come down. There have been risks taken off as well. So it does speak to the effectiveness of this as a tool. And obviously, we have had substantial discussion about this previously and its use as a tool by various departments and cross departments as a way to identify, be conscious and manage risks. And the removal of risks as well as the downgrading of risk does speak to that success. So I think it just speaks to the effectiveness of it. Okay, at this time, I'm going to say good evening to Councillor Patel and to whoever has been watching us this evening, and thank you. And we will move into a closed session now. So give it a moment.